Thanks, Toby, for joining us on BMXUltra.com. Really interested in finding out about how Box has been going and how the ABC thing all came about. So, what is it, nearly 10 years now that you've been at Box?
Yeah, so 10 years ago, October, we basically got the corporation started, 2011 of October. We basically announced everything January 1st of 2012, moved into the building we're in right now, April of 2012. So in April, it'll be full 10 years just in this building with Box. So yeah, 10 years ago, good number.
Is there going to be any big celebrations at Box Components?
You know, we haven't talked about that yet. It's funny, I was telling one of the ABC team yesterday that our very first shipment was on Halloween of that same year. So basically, moving to the building in April, it wasn't all the way to Halloween later that year. We actually shipped a product. So that first 8 months or whatever it was pretty rough because we had all this overhead with not a single thing going out the door. So basically, Halloween is our anniversary of the first day we ship, and that we do celebrate. So.
So we touched on earlier that you used to have quite a few product brands running all at the same time. I think it was Speedco, Intense, THE, Sins. I think I must have missed one, but I can't think of what it was.
Bigger helmets.
That's right.
Yeah. So we had a few. I had some other street brands that didn't do well. One was called and Avenue, which didn't do. I don't know. I'm not much of a street guy, so I had a hard time in that field. But yeah, I had a lot of brands at one point, for sure.
And so how come with Box you've been so focused on this one brand?
So when I had BSI, I didn't have a lot of friends because I was in competition with everybody. And I could tell you stories and stories about, relationships with Redline or SBS or some of these people that I had relationships with. But when the product overlap became too much to bear for some other brands, the relationships went south. So I was kind of being considered somewhat of a monopoly in a sense. I don't know if that's the right word to say, but I basically had a lot going on. And so I decided when I sold that company and started Box to say, hey, less people, less stress, less products, less brands. Let's just focus on one brand and do it that way, live your life that way. But what happened was, as we built Box up, and we literally built every single part there is for a BMX race bike, everything. We have tires coming soon, which we'll talk about. I built everything up, and I realized the company's only going to be a certain number at the end of the year. It's never going to be as big as what I had before. And all of a sudden, my ego gets in the way, and it starts to say, "Hey, you want a bigger business than what you got." And part of that was the mountain bike stuff for Box. So Box really got into the mountain bike side 6 years ago. We invested a lot of our money and BMX money and things into mountain biking, which was probably the biggest and hardest thing I've ever done by far, is to go against the two big S guys and try to make a name for ourselves. 6 years later, due to COVID and our tenacity, we're selling a lot of mountain bike stuff right now. So that did pan out, but for the BMX side, I just can't grow it anymore. Hence my involvement with ABC.
So moving on to ABC. So I had been following ABC for a while. I'd been receiving press releases for, it must be 18 months. And then all of a sudden I read in a recent press release from Box that you created ABC. And so it got a bit confusing for me. So it wasn't an acquisition. It was something you were part of from in the early days?
Yeah, I was in the very beginning because I have a lot of customers in the Box side for BMX. That's a little bit of a conflict or a little bit of overlap, like I had at BSI. It's the same situation where if I create something and have a partner or a friend or whatever in the business that's making the same product, how can I fit in? But when I realized that having just race components isn't a big enough company, that I would need other things, this is when I started to create ABC along with Mark Cote, my partner. So in the press release, Mark is in the movie business, and he's an ex-BMXer. He's a little bit younger than me. And then he was buying BMX stuff. He lives in Canada. He was buying BMX stuff from me. And, and all of a sudden I see all this stuff going to Canada. Like, who is this guy? Anyway, he comes and visits me a few years ago, and we became friends. And we talked about his past as a BMXer and of course my career and things like that. And as we were doing some mountain bike rides together, we decided, hey, do you want to start another BMX company? I go, well, I need a frame. I feel like Box needs a frame to hang its technology on. And that's a conversation we'll have in a second. So him and I were both interested in the brand Race Inc. As a matter of fact, I wanted the brand Race Inc. when I was developing Box. It just wasn't available. I thought Race Inc. was the coolest name because I'm a racer. And if I'm going to go race something, I think what better name is the word Race Inc., right? It's very corporate, but very race, right? That's simple. And he actually wrote a Race Inc. when he was racing in the 80s. So he had I don't know, a passion for the name too. And we just happened to know a guy who had rekindled the brand, and he was a Box customer, and he was looking to sell the brand. So Mark and I decided to acquire that brand. And acquiring that brand, it was all about hanging, my parts or Box parts on the frame and developing a frame and having some frame. And I just didn't want my name involved because it was kind of I don't want to say it's a conflict. It was just another step in a different direction. And anyway, long story short, we were able to acquire Race Inc. And when we did that, I thought, well, we need a parent company, just like VSI had these other things. So I wanted to be at the top of the alphabet, and the word ABC, American BMX Company, came to my mind. I go, that's who I want to be. That's what we want to be. And we created American BMX Company to house not only Race Inc., but Cook Brothers, Bottema, and a laundry list of stuff we'll probably talk about the next year. So right now we can talk. I'm trying to look at. We got Race Inc., Bottema, Cook Brothers, a brand called Rider First, which is our sponsorship program. Two other brands that I'll tell you about later. Three other brands I'll tell you about later. And there was one more I want to say. Oh, we made a deal with Tongi BMX to be the exclusive worldwide distributor of the word Tongi BMX. And I'm signing a contract right now with another brand as far as selling them and having that too. So right now we're looking at probably 10 brands that we'll be managing and producing products under, both retro and race. Box will always stay to be our race components, but Race Inc. will have a race brand and a retro brand. And I'm very curious about the retro bikes in Australia and how big that might be.
Well, I don't actually know. It's not something I got into. I stuck with race for 40 years, and it's a groove that I like. I have noticed a massive following in the US, and just figured that there'd be a little bit of that here in Australia, but I really have no idea, to be honest.
Yeah, well, I do know some guys. It's funny, when I was in Australia, I want to say 79, it was probably 80. I don't forget when I was there, the very first time for Raleigh. I made a bunch of friends with guys there, and made some, and we had kept on track together on Facebook the last, whatever, 30, 40 years, whatever it's been. And I see them riding the big bikes at the beach, doing these things. These are the guys that I raced against when I was there. So I think there's a little bit of a following. I just don't know how much down there. So, but we will have the race stuff too. So it's just.
So just to understand the structure, would Box then fall under ABC, or is it a separate thing?
No, completely separate company. So Box, I have a partner with in Box, and then Mark's my partner in ABC. Completely separate. But we just happen to have two buildings here in this location, two different addresses, and one of the buildings was all R&D for Box, and we had room over there, so I was able to move some stuff around and create a warehouse for ABC here at the Box location. So that way I can manage both of the companies, and now we have both staffs from both teams inside this building and helping Box with expenses and things too. So
will there be a crossover in direction of the products? Like Box is heavily into the oversized technologies. Will we see those oversized technologies cross over into ABC products as well?
Yeah, so for example, the frames, the racing frames will have oversized technology that I'm allowed to even grow more, meaning we have a bottom bracket standard coming that we'll introduce with the frame, which accepts our M35 cranks. And what happened was when I built the M35 crank, frame makers had to follow and make the frame to fit the crank, because I was limited on on Euro BB. So how do I build a very stiff crank for a guy like Nick Keeman? How do I build that without making the bottom bracket bigger? And we did, and Mabo and DK and some of these other great brands, GT, they all followed, SE, they all followed and made the BB30. But the sales of the frames were never really that good. So they slowly went the other direction, went back to traditional old school interfaces. So for me, Race Inc. is about allowing me to hang these crazy box ideas on a frame that accepts these parts. And for me, oversized was always about, you can always step down. In other words, you know, on our headsets and our X5 fork, which has been wildly popular, when they finally made the tapered headset, if you don't have, you know, a tapered fork, you can still put an 1.8" fork in your bike with an adapter, a little washer. It's not a big deal. Same with the cranks. If you don't have a 35mm spindle, it's just an interface change, and you can put your, you know, 24mm spindle in there. But to go the other way, you can't. You can't take a 24mm spindle and put a 35 in the frame. Don't work. So that was been hard for me to sell to the other BMX brands to get them calling on board. So that is kind of was my main motivator to do this thing with ABC and Race Inc. was to be able to have a frame that allows my crazy brain to think about these parts that I want, right? You know, I was the first one to do a 20mm front axle, front fork. I was the first one to do the tapered fork. So I was the first one to do big bottom brackets. And I'm not saying that in a boasting statement, but it took many, many years for all the brands to now ride 20mm axles. You know, if you look at it, every pro has a 20mm axle in the front of the bike. You know, and I learned that from my mountain bike career. So it wasn't like this was something that no one knew about. When I was racing downhill mountain bike, I went from a 10mm axle to a 20mm RockShox boxer fork. And the first time I hit the rocks, I'm like, oh my God, this is completely a different bike. So all I did was take that experience from my mountain bike career and moved it into BMX, as I know really well. And it took 15 years before it really is what everybody uses. You don't really see 10mm pro forks anymore, you know. So I feel that the same thing's going to happen with the other ideas, but I need a flagship frame. And that's what racing's about to us. So yes, will be crossover, yes. With the other brands like Cook Brothers, will Cook Brothers ever do that? Cook Brothers is more geared towards the retro guys, but the retro guys are now also asking for stiffer, lighter, and faster bikes.
All right.
So, yeah, oh yeah, they're all wanted. They're asking for carbon forks. They're asking for 20mm hubs. They're asking for disc brakes. That's all starting to happen in the retro world. So our goal is to bring some of that technology from racing, from box, into the retro world too. Because all the retro guys, actually, if you buy a retro SE, the first thing you do is you take off the brakes that come on and put box brakes on it. Not that it's oversized, but they're a higher end brake, and they're accepted by the retro guys' boxes. So we'll see a lot of box crossover into the retro scene as well. But again, there's always going to be, with all these brands, there's going to be overlap. Like Cook Brothers has a chain ring, Box has a chain ring, made by the same people with different looks and different names, different colors, right? And some people like Cook Brothers and some people like Box, and that's great. You know, we'll let that be. So there'll be some overlap, but ultimately in the end, it allows us to build things now that we have the full platform. Or before with Box, I only had the parts. I didn't have the frame. And now I can kind of go crazy on it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Excuse me. So what is available from ABC right now? I did notice the Racing frame has been basically on display for a long time now, but is that available for people to purchase yet?
No, due to one, our engineering department learning how to do these interfaces and all this stuff. It's taken us a long time to build the frame that we want, but more importantly, COVID has really pushed things along. If you place a PO right now for a complete bicycle with hydraulic brakes, you'll see it in 2023. That's just the reality of all this, right? So we do have Cook Brother headsets and chain rings and some things like that that we've made that are in the building now. We're selling. The Racing retro frames are on the water. We'll be here in a couple weeks. Same with the Bottema forks. And the complete bikes will be here in October, November. And that's a line of 20-inch through 29-inch retro bikes. Hopefully at the Grands, you'll see our first race frame at the USA BMX Grands. So hopefully our teams will show up with frames there. I'm not holding my breath just because, you know, getting aluminum is crazy. But next year we will have two models of race frames, what's called our Elite frame and then our Neo Retro frame, which the Neo Retro frame looks a lot like the bikes that were in the 80s, right? Except all the technology, crazy, but it's really good looking. It's just a bike that looks like the past, but has, you know, oversized interfaces all throughout, disc brakes, this kind of things. And then we're going to do a very hydroform, you know, high-end F1 type of frame as well. which is, hydrofoam top tubes and all that. Look, nothing nobody's did before. So that all will happen next year. POs are placed, engineering's done. It's just we're in line. We're waiting for the stuff to be made. So.
It has obviously kept you busy during this COVID period. How do you keep up with now two or actually multiple brands?
It's not easy. I mean, I wake up every morning and sometimes go, what am I doing? So I want this, Shane. I just personally want to do this. I don't have to do this. I want to do this. And I think I'm very fortunate to be able to be in a position to where I can do what I want to do on a daily basis. And for whatever reason, I've always been inspired by my old bosses, my old GT boss, my old Iron Horse boss. These are guys that I rode for during my career. I was inspired by their business, savvy. And I always said that when I actually was writing for Giant, the boss asked me what I would do with my life. I go, I'm gonna sit in your chair, and he thought I was joking. And it's always what I wanted to be, And it took me a long time to go through apprenticeships to vice presidents to presidencies to get where I wanted to go. And it's a lot to do. Back to your question, but it's something I think that will pay off in the long run, and I have a passion for it. The difficult part is getting people on board with me, right? Getting people to follow the ideology of Oversized or all these brands and get everybody to work at the same speed and effort that I'm trying to do. But in the end, I've been doing it now 21 years since I quit racing. More than that? I retired in 98. So how long is that? 98.
Must be about 23, 24 years.
About 23, 4 years. And so basically, when I quit racing in 98, I made the THE Fender and was wildly successful. I thought I knew about business. And 2 years later, the Fender wasn't cool anymore. Right now, I'm 40 years old and with no sales. Right, so I had to reinvent myself as a person and understand business and all that. So that was basically 20 years ago and 20 plus years ago, and been learning ever since. I learn every day, but I get to do what I love and understand and know. Right, and I've been wanting to do since I was 12. So here I am. But a lot of brands, a lot of products. There's literally, I don't want to say 100, but I have probably 50 products that I'm working on at all times. Always.
Oh,
wow.
Yeah. So I think boxes imported in Australia via Advanced Traders. Will ABC be through Advanced Traders as well, or are you working with somebody else?
We haven't talked to them yet. We actually sent out emails this last week to Corey. Love Corey. But I haven't heard back from him to see if he wants to be interested in that. I know he's a big DK guy and stuff, which is awesome company. Love those guys. So I don't know. We'll see how they feel about bringing the brands in. I don't know yet.
Let's go back to box components then, and talk about some of the more popular products and how the oversized technology works. I guess some of the most popular stuff I've seen are the cranks and the stems and bar setup.
Right.
What was it that made you think, well, we need to go oversized with a clamping area, or we need to go oversized with a crank and a spindle? And what made you sort of sit back and say, well, BMX is doing it wrong and this is how it should be?
I think it still goes back to that experience I had in my mountain bike career. I was lucky enough or fortunate enough to, when I first started racing mountain bikes, we had no suspension. And when I quit, I had 8 inches of travel front and rear, and I had 20 millimeter axles and 24 millimeter spindles. We think we started off with 19, but I think it was that experience working with the engineers, because mountain biking was such a high level of commitment amongst factories and brands to bring technology to the table, where BMX wasn't getting the same thing during my day. I mean, we made longer frames, we did some stuff, and of course Hutch had some great cranks and things that they have all done, but I think my experience as a mountain bike racer and seeing the evolution of my 22.2 handlebar going to 25.4, going to 30.8 or 31.8 or whatever, I was involved in that. So all I really did was, I knew it worked, and I knew that if I brought it to BMX, we'd have something. And then we actually did run a test on a 20 millimeter rear hub, and with George from Renan. So we built, this is a long time ago, we built 2 complete identical speed bikes, one 10 millimeter bike and one 20 millimeter bike. The only difference between the 2 bikes, we actually used the same tire. He wanted to swap the tire because he wanted everything exactly the same. And tires vary about 10%, right? So With the smaller riders, we're seeing a 33% increase in distance over the first 100 feet with the 20 millimeter rear hub versus the 10. And that's all frame flex. It's just not forward momentum. And what was interesting was the bigger guys had less of a number. The smaller guys had a bigger number because they can't flex the bike as much. So George at Renan can say, yeah, we did this 15 years ago, and we proved that an average of 20 to 33%, we were seeing the first 100 feet be that much quicker. And it's funny, the bike feels harder to pedal and things feel differently about the bike, but that's because the bike is moving forward and not flexing underneath of you. So all that made me say it works in every capacity. So the new bottom bracket stand we're doing, it's allowing the bottom bracket to put the bearings inside, allowing the chainstays to be wider, allowing the rear end to be wider, allowing stiffness. So everything we're doing is about bringing technology to BMX, and it's a lot of money on our part to invest, but this is what we do for a living here, so that's why we're going after it, right? So believe in it quite a bunch.
So it must be working for a lot of the pro guys. We see Nick Kimman just won gold medal and the world championships on box. Other names like at least Post running box all the time. There's been a lot of pro riders and riders right through to juniors who have adapted to box. What do you think is that's made it so popular? Do you think, obviously there's a particular style, when you look at it, you think, well, this is definitely a box product just by looking at it. But do you think it's all that technology? Do you think the Oversized is really working?
Yeah, well, we do know it works. We have engineering statistics knowing it works. I think overall, Box, the group of people here, has a good, clean looking image, corporate style, customer service, ever evolving logos that are better, but a very clean image that when you look at it, you know it's us, and a lot of people want to be a part of it. So I can't say it's just Oversized. I think it's the marketing team. I think it's the word Box. I think it's the logo. I think it's our colors, and I think it's the shapes. Our our ID department here, our industrial design guys, they got the shapes kind of going. I kind of guide them a little bit, but they know what we want. And if we take Oversized and we look at Oversized and we work around that, we come up with these shapes, right? So I think it's a combination of all of it. And I think we came into the scene when VSI, my other company, was starting to go the other way. And we came to the market with this completely different and upgraded version of everything that hadn't been done before. And even all our brakes they're not oversized, but they came with titanium bolts and precision bearings around the pivots and all the things it took to make a V-brake at the time better than anybody else's. And we just did that. And I think that's part of the whole thing. It's just that we spent a lot of time and money developing products that were better than most of our competitors. So
I think with a lot of the components, you have different levels. So you have 1 to 4, I think it is it?
1 to 5, yeah.
1 to 5. What's the idea behind that? Why wouldn't someone jump straight from, say, 5 to 1 or?
Well, 5 is value, where 1 is performance, right? 2 completely different price points, completely different things that work. And then we also have Hex Lab, which is above 1, and that's only reserved for very, very high-end, very expensive, low-volume parts. But the main reason with that is I had all these products, and me and Gamstetter started naming these products Eclipse and Focus and Delta, math terms, because Box is a math term. And we got sued on a couple names along the way, trademarks, because everyone seems to pay attention to what we're doing over here, and some of the big guys don't like some of that stuff, so we got sued over the names. So when we started doing the mountain bike stuff, we had to reinvent ourselves and say, what do we call ourselves without trademarking every single name? And we have 700 SKUs here, just in BMX. So how do you trademark? There's a lot of sizes and colors, but there's 100 different things, and how do you trademark 100 names? Without getting yourself in trouble. So that's how Box 1 through 5 came about. Was okay, can't trademark 1 through 5. You can't be in trouble for using the word 1. So we just decided to remove all the names of the brands or of the components and call them 1 through 5 based upon their quality, performance, value, these things. And we set that up. So it was more of a trademark exercise, but 5 being the lowest, hex lab being the highest. People understand that now, and it's actually working out really well for us. So when we say box 3, it's a performance value, and we kind of know that. It's going to be a mid-price point product. It's going to work great, and it's going to come in at a price that's tolerable. For hex lab, we know you're going to pay to the top for every carbon titanium bolt you can get, and that's that, right? So anyway, it's working out pretty good for us.
So what's the more popular range? Is it the hex, or is it one? Or
well, with today's market, I can't keep anything in stock. It seems 1 and 2 seem to be the most. I don't have a whole lot of hex lab things. We're coming out with new tires now. They're box 1 and 2. But I used to have a hex lab tire, and the tire did okay. It was made in Japan. It was a great tire, but not really what I wanted. Because tires, you never know how they're going to work until you actually make one and ride it. There's no testing a tire. You make it and you go ride it, and so hex lab, I think I missed the mark a little bit on those. So the new tire, they're being tested right now, which is a box 1 and 2. It's not made in Japan. So for me, it was downgrading. So that's why I call it a box 1. It's still a 120 TPI tire, folding bead, where the box 2 is a 60 TPI tire, wire bead. So you see how we kind of break it down. So it's either, and those are being made in Taiwan versus other ones made in Japan. So this is how that all kind of breaks down, is the way I see it, at least sometimes. And 1 and 2 by far the biggest sellers. Right.
So what can you tell us about those tires at the moment?
Here, it's okay. Well, it's pretty much where I screwed up on hex lab, and what I did when I created the micro knobby. So the micro knobby was something I created, micro knobby 1 and 2. I think when I sold BSI, it went back to B rubber and became micro knobby 3. I don't know what they changed, but it's basically an upgraded version of all the things that micro knobby didn't do well. I basically took and created, basically up that, right? So it's basically a micro knobby that's been brought to 2020, right? Yeah.
Is it tubeless compatible?
It is tubeless compatible, but it's the rim is the problem. So finding the right rim and the tire to work, that's the biggest problem, right? So, and we have a carbon fiber rim right now that is tubeless compatible. We haven't been able to test the 2 yet. That's a long story, but we're close. We're close. So
as a manufacturer, you'd probably realize there's a whole lot of product out there that people can get their hands on that's just rebadged sort of lower end stuff, and they might try to say put a tubeless tire on it and it's not going to fit properly. What would make your system different to sort of grabbing something off the shelf?
Well, it's really about how you there's the interface between the bead and the rim. That's one important thing, right? So it's how the hook works. But the biggest thing is, if you were to take a good tire and you put it on a crappy rim, the rim doesn't have a shape that allows you to hit that air and pop it to the sides. So you can put your goop in there and get it all ready, but if the tire can't explode to the sides, that stuff flies everywhere. So the rim profile has to be tubeless ready. And then once you get it pumped up, the bead of the tire has to have a certain hook, right? So if you don't have that, you're never going to be able to pump the tire up. I mean, dads have tried it, and I really believe in tubeless stuff. We did it 20 years ago, but it were messy and difficult and all that stuff. But the riders thought they were faster, but they're very hard to keep on the wheel and to maintain the latex inside, right? But right now it's doable. The technology's come a long way, but I wouldn't put it right now. I wouldn't put any of my pros on the front of their bike and put them on a supercross track. Not quite yet, right? Because when they carve, they can pull the tire off, and that's the same road bike guys. They finally figured it out, but the road bike guys don't have, as much of a side pressure as a BMX guy, especially because the tires are a lot bigger.
So is there stuff that you've noticed that you've had to change the design of since you started Box because of the way tracks have changed and the way the riders are getting faster?
It's funny, Shane, you asked that. So how I got involved in BMX parts was at the end of my mountain bike career. I did the fender, and it was wildly successful. And then it died on me, so I was looking for things to do. And I was invited to go out to a USA BMX race from the owners to come and visit the BMX race. And I hadn't made a BMX part yet. I made a little bit of stuff at THE, and I went to a race and I looked down at the track and I saw big knobbies. I saw high bottom brackets, and I saw blue groove turns. And I looked and I go, why are we running big knobbies? And why do we have high bottom brackets? We're all clipped in. No one's putting their foot down. None of this makes any sense to me. But no one had really put any effort into evolving the equipment in BMX. They were still running IRC Sirens, which was the hot tire at the time. And it was had a lot of lugs in it. And I thought, why do we need that? And I had just raced a mountain bike race where I ran a slick in the back because the course was blue groove. And I ran a little tiny tire in the back. And I hauled butt with that tire because I didn't have this big clumpy tire on the back of my bike. So from that experience, I looked down and I go, no, this doesn't work. First thing let's do, the guys are clipped in, they're not putting their feet down. Let's drop the bottom brackets of the frame. So I created Intense BMX, and we basically lowered the bottom brackets almost a full 2 inches that were basically the bikes that were on the market. And it hit right out of the gate because the kids were able to manual and turn, and they're all clipped in. It didn't matter. Then I came out with tire right behind that, which was the micro knobby, which was just as fast as you could be. And that basically changed the way I think BMX was looked at that point. And the success of those two things were so good. That's why I've been sticking to it all along, to say, hey, we gotta make changes, and we gotta adhere to the changing tracks, which is your question, and we got to create that. The thing, the tracks haven't changed much other than the Supercross stuff and all that. So, the Supercross stuff, that's where the 1.5 head tube came from. It's those guys needed that turning power. So as the 20 millimeter axle started working for the guys, then where's the next possible place things are flexing? Got the handlebar, the 31A, 20 millimeter axle. What's the next possible place? In the head tube. That's where the next flex was happening, right? So we addressed that, right? So we're actually, before this meeting, I was out testing even a different handlebar. So we're moving up the ladder to different stuff at this point, right? So,
is there anything else new apart from the tires that Box has ready on the horizon?
Always up to new times. Carbon fiber rims, right? So we do have those now. Those are on the website. It's funny, those have been in the customs for literally 2 months, for whatever reason. Okay, they're coming this week. So the carbon fiber rims are the newest. With titanium cogs, we recently launched. We have an axle that's coming that's extremely unique. It's one axle, fits front and back of your bike. 20, 10, 15, one axle fits all axles. So that's coming. I'm pretty excited about that. In this handlebar we're working on, we have a new Delta stem, which is forged, which was very popular for us. So that used to be extruded. Now we're forging that stem, making it cold forged, making it much tougher than it was before. I don't know, we're just so much more. Those things I just said are all in the pipeline and going to happen by the end of the year, if not beginning of next year. So.
All right. So let's jump back to ABC. It must be pretty exciting to be able to play around with some of the heritage stuff, given your heritage. And obviously you probably know a lot of the history of those brands. How important is it for you to make sure that you really hit the mark straight off the bat with these ones?
It's difficult because we launched some Cook Brother headsets and some small parts in the beginning. And some people are interested in it's just another name on a like product, but there actually was a lot of thought put into that product, trying to keep the heritage of Cook Brothers and trying to keep the style and the shape of that, but fit modern bikes. So I don't know if I disagree with some of the comments we had, but right now I think it's baby steps. No one has retro frames that have oversized bottom brackets. So I'm not going to come in with a Cook Brothers crank, oversized, because I don't have nobody to sell them to, right? But we are working on stuff like that. Right now it's about getting the shapes and the feel that we want of the retro look, like the Neo retro frame we're building for race, bringing those to the table that allows me to sell cranks to everybody's frame. But the next generation of crank and the next generation of frame will start to introduce some of this technology. So, but keeping the style, it's actually a lot of fun because with these guys, I don't have to worry about the weight. I don't have to worry about every little critical dimension. I just say, hey, the handlebar should be shaped like this. And they can be 32 inches wide because there's no rule, right? And if they're a little bit heavier, who cares? They don't care, but they sure look sexy. So it's been fun because I'm not dealing with price points or weight. These guys will spend whatever it takes to get the bike the way they want it. The hardest part is to stay to the true heritage and strength to look. So we spent a lot of time looking up what did the Cook Brothers crank looks like in the past. And if we make one out of a different material, because that material doesn't work anymore, what would the crank look like? And then how do you tool that crank? And how do you make multiple sizes? And how do you do all this stuff with the factory? That's when it starts to get, I don't want to say tough, fun almost. But I've been enjoying doing this because I'm not restricted to the price or the weight, right? And you know the three rules of, or the three stories of bicycle parts, right? You know that.
No.
So everybody wants lightweight, cheap, and strong.
Oh yeah, you can only get two of those, really, can't you?
Get two of those. You're not going to get all three. So with this, I get to be able to not worry about the weight, not worry about the price, right? I'm able to create things that that are kind of a little more fun than maybe some other stuff I've had to do in the past, right? But yeah, it's interesting because I didn't really keep my old stuff. I didn't really keep the legacy. I wasn't into it. It was a job for me, not that it was a bad job. I just moved on to being in the business. But now I look back at it, I probably wish I would have kept my old stuff, and which, you know, I probably could have been a millionaire if I would have kept all this stuff, right? But anyway, so I get to go back now and look at it all and kind of appreciate it a little bit more than I did maybe when I quit. I think a lot of us ex-athletes get a little bit better when it's over because we have such great lives, flying over to Australia, hang out with cool people. And then one day, nope, you got to pay yourself to go there, right? It's like, what? Anyway, so yeah, so I think it's quite fun to do this. You know, the race stuff is very, very challenging, but I think the retro stuff's a little bit more fun. And I didn't believe in retro. 10 years ago, I would say, nope, it's a fad. It ain't staying. And 10 years later, man, it's bigger than ever. And these guys have some really nice bikes, and they're dying for this stuff.
So when you're talking about retro, are you talking about like the collectors and all the show and shines and that sort of thing?
Well, no, because we're not catering to those guys. They all want a Bottema 1-inch fork with threads because we own Bottema now, right? So we're not going to make that fork because one, most of those guys won't want it because it's not original, right? And if you're buying that fork, you're buying it for some old frame that you have laying around, and it's really not going to fit your whole collector's thing. We're catering to the guys who want new bikes that look like the stuff in the past, but they want them in 26 or 29 inches tall, right? And there's a huge market. There was a write-up here recently that 5,000 guys on those bikes taking over the streets of San Francisco, right, or Santa Cruz. And you know, it wasn't rained out. It'd probably been more, but it's a pretty big deal here in America. So.
Yeah, I just haven't heard of large rides like that here, and I don't know if it's just that we're not organised enough or we're a few years behind or what it is. But yeah, when you talk about 5,000 people on the road all at once, pulling wheelies and crazy.
Critical mass. They just take over the streets. I've done a few of those in Hollywood, in Long Beach. I've done a few of those. The guys they just take over the streets, man. His cars just have to wait because there's so many people, and they're all on big BMX bikes. So crazy.
I'm just trying to think of what else I need to ask you. So we touched on Bottema a little bit. You're going to make a modern race version of that fork, I read somewhere. Is that right?
No, it's all retro.
Oh, so there's no 20 mil axle.
Well, it does have 20 mil axles.
Oh, okay.
So we are trying to bring, you know, the technology over to retro. That's what they're asking for. And I got kind of hot to do this a few years ago when Craig Turner came to me and asked me, Gary Turner's son, a friend of mine right down the road here. And he came to me and said, hey man, can you make me a 29-inch carbon fiber fork? I'm like,
oh, wow.
No, I don't want to do that. Why? And he goes, all his customers, because he hand makes frames, are all asking for lighter, better stuff. And he's a chromoly guy. So they want aluminum frames. They want this or that. So when we made the Bottema fork, we put a 20 millimeter axle in it with a step down washer, like we talked about before. It can step down to a 10 or a 15. So the washer goes any direction, or you put a 20 millimeter axle in. And we have some bikes that are at these 5,000 people rides with 20 millimeter axles in them. And the first thing everybody says, oh my God, this bike's fast, it's light, it goes. So they're all seeing it. We just have to build the product and get it to market. So Bottema fork will look exactly like it looked in the past. except it'll be modern technology and be in big sizes.
So
Right?
20, 26, 29.
26 to 20. We did build some 20s and 24s. We did not very few of them, but we did build some for those guys. But it'll still be 1" and 1/8. They won't be 1" threadless.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So, but they look just like the past.
Do you think with Bottema it'll just be forks, or is that a brand that you could grow with other products?
I got some other things I'm working on with that. We got a new fork that's extremely out in left field that I would never put another brand on. If it takes off, great. If it's a flop, maybe, I don't know. Sometimes my ideas are floppy, right? There's a headset that's coming, a really high-end headset. I think that brand, if you made it to your frame, I think a headset goes with it. Beyond that, we don't really have a whole lot on for Bottema, but for Cook Brothers, we have everything, just like Box, have everything we can make, but for retro guys, every single part.
So going back to Cook Brothers, you were talking about cranks. Will there be a, I guess, box influenced crank, like something that's going to be racy looking? And Cook Brothers cranks when they were first made were pretty much ahead of their time, and the people that rode them sort of rode them to the ground. They just rode them to death. So will you have that kind of look and feel with the new Cook Brothers cranks?
Yes and no. The first crank's coming in 19mm spindles.
Oh, okay.
I'm trying to hit a certain market. The material's not alloy. I'm trying to hit a certain segment of the market. It looks just like the crank of the past, but with different material. Beyond that, yes, we will come back and do an interface that's bigger once the frames catch up with what we're trying to do. And then later on, will there be an M35? But I think at that point, they need to be aluminum, and it kind of gets away from the Cook Brothers styling. And that's a whole tooling and how tools work and how multiple sizes work in a tool. And you got to lay all that out ahead of time. And that shape of the Cook Brothers crank doesn't really fall into that type of technology because of the way the thing's shaped. And I don't want to take away from the shape. So we might be limited a little bit. But yeah, everything that we're doing has a similar, I say, path. So you start off with something that makes sense for the guys today, knowing that the next generation will be what we think the next iteration of frames or technology is. But again, like Craig Turner says, they're starving for it. And these guys are absolutely wanting cool stuff. They're buying $600 Hutch copy of pedals now here, like nothing. The first thing they do is go get $600 pedals, and it's nothing for them, right? So that's all the stuff we want to address as we move forward. So
will there be a hub under any of those retro brands?
Yeah, so Cook Brothers has taken over one of Box's old Quantum hubs, which is a 20mm hub. It was a hub that wasn't a big success for us because it's not instant engagement. But Mark, my partner, loves the noisy feel of a ratchety hub, and so we're going to do that under the Cook Brothers brand. And then we also going to do a Box Stealth / Cook Brothers product. So some of the things that I don't want to retool for, it don't make sense. There'll be a co-branded product. Like Cook Brothers can't buy Stealth off me, so we'll make Cook Brothers a Stealth hub that looks like Cook Brothers style. So we should see sample like any day for that. So I'm excited about that too. So there'll be hubs, there'll be rims, tires. Box is doing the tires right now. We're doing 26 and 29-inch versions of the Micronavi, which is a great street tire until you turn, and when you turn, it's knobbies, right? So I mean, that's the whole point. And I think the street guys or the retro guys are gonna love the tire too. But those are Box. But yes, hubs, spokes, not so much yet, but.
You did just remind me about the Stealth hub. I'd forgotten that that's kind of new to the market now, isn't it? The Box Stealth hub.
Yeah, we bought it 6 years ago. And at the 6 years ago, I had some money left over from a sale and all that. And we got into the mountain bike side and Stealth at the same time. And along the way, we lost some good people due to various reasons. And Stealth got put on the back burner because the market for the drivetrain was much more potential for us. But we did make the Stealth hub. We have the experts on the market now. We've sold several thousand of those, the expert ones. We just never had success or finished the pro versions or the mountain bike versions. But that's all being done now. But like I said, the drivetrain took precedence a couple years ago over Stealth. But we've had Stealth now 6 years. We've owned it.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what kind of changes did you make from the original Stealth hub?
Made a Shimano driver. Basically was the biggest complaint, was that the guys couldn't find the sprockets and they were hard to come by. They wanted a more universal product. And of course, I never really liked Stealth shapes. So it's a Toby shape, you know, very square and edged and stuff. It's a box shape with a Shimano driver. Other than that, it's the same thing. You know, it's got the same bearing inside, the same setup. We just basically sculpted the outside. And making the driver was the hardest part. That's why he didn't have the Shimano driver in the beginning. So we had to figure out a way to make the Shimano driver go into the Stealth bearing application and figure all that out. And it took a long time and a lot of sampling and pissed a lot of people off along the way, but we're finally there. So.
Did you manage to find a way to save some weight? Because I think weight was one of the problems with the Stealth hub, wasn't it?
Yeah, we know how to do it, which would be more of a Hex Lab product. You're going to pay a lot for it. You got to go in there and put titanium sleeves and stuff in places to get rid of the weight. But inherently, like Onyx and like Stealth, that type of system is just heavy because you got this bearing that has this force and it has to be encapsulated by a piece of steel, right? And that piece of steel is where all the weight is. Because if you don't, without that steel, that bearing will blow right through aluminum. So the only way to get this thing lighter is to take that piece of steel and put a piece of titanium in it. But the tolerances are like a medical grade tolerance. It's you can't just put something in a little bit crooked. It ain't gonna work. It's got to be perfectly flat, right? So that's been the biggest struggle, is finding the manufacturers to do that type of work, to keep those tolerances very high on that system. So, but getting the weight out, it's inherently going to be a heavier hub.
So the price is a bit better now that it's made overseas rather than
yeah. So we I think we're at 350 or 399 for the rear hub. And then Onyx is like at 550, right? We can't make anything here. That's the reason why Stealth sold it. It was all made here. He wasn't making any money with it. Great guy, Todd. But he had the medical grade tolerances. He could do it, but his hubs were retailing for $500 or $600, and he still wasn't making any money on it. So for him, it was like, why, right? So that's how we kind of wound up with it. But it was his idea. I got to give him all the credit for that. It was not something I came up with. But and our goal was to move it to Taiwan and get the price points to where it's more feasible for people and to be a profitable segment, right? So, yeah.
People have taken to the new Stealth hub pretty well, obviously, with the kind of volumes you were talking about. Do you think that'll be continuing to grow in popularity as people sort of need to replace hubs?
Well, I'm hoping so. I mean, one of the things that we're doing a 10 millimeter and a 15 millimeter right now. So we're already going to the 15 in the back. I would like to go straight to 20, but 20 doesn't allow the Shimano cog. So we have to go back to our own cog system, which we're creating with the Quantum Hub at Cook Brothers now. We're creating our own cog system, which is very similar to the Shimano, but larger, right? So I want to get all that done first, and then we'll come back to the 20 and the Stealth. But right now we're doing a 10 and a 15. And I really think when people realize that bigger axle in the back makes the bike faster, we start proving that with our frames, then I think the hubs are really gonna, do well, right? So I know Onyx, all the pros are running 20 millimeter Onyx rears, but these guys are getting their frames made. These guys have adapters, they have all that, right? Disc brakes and all that, but it's not something you and I can walk into a store and buy. I'm not gonna go down to the bike shop right now and buy all that. Not gonna happen. But the pros are running it because it does make a difference. So I think we just have to get it into a volume set, volume meaning quantity set. And once it's more available by using the frame, back to why I'm doing this, I think increase the sales of it, yeah. And I want to prove that 20 millimeter rear hubs is just the answer, right?
There's very few frames available with a 20 mil rear hub, isn't there? I think DK is one that comes to mind, the older Speedco and the Intense, but I can't think of too many others.
Mabo, GT had it, SC had it, especially a Thrill. There's basically a dropout system out there that I created at Speed. Speed had a 20 millimeter rear. So when I had Speed, I created all that at Speed. And then the Thrills and the Mabos and the DKs all follow later on because you can adapt down to 10 with just a set of plates. So that's been around for a while, but most of the people don't have the hubs. So they're running these plate systems with a 10 millimeter in them. So, and I'm not so sure about the 15 or how Onyx does with that, but I just want to go straight to 20 millimeter at this point in the rear, and it does make a difference for sure.
Are there Are there other technologies out there that you've seen that you thought, I'd like to adapt that to box? Obviously, I mean, in our discussion, you've talked about a whole bunch of products that you've basically created and technologies that you've introduced to BMX racing. But is there anything out there that you've seen that you think, well, that's a pretty cool thing? I want to bring that into the box lineup.
Of course, it's just I don't want to say hundreds, but there's a lot of technologies, I should say, that I really think thermoplastics, right? So these are the things I'd like to bring, but the volume of BMX doesn't allow that. So if I want to make a thermoplastic never plate handlebar stem combo, somebody's probably already doing it, right? You're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in tooling, right? And you're going to get one handlebar, which is going to fit X amount of people, and you start to break that down, doesn't make business sense to do it, right? But I think it's not so much the product itself. I think it's technologies out there that I'm seeing that I want to bring in. One of those would be, instead of CNCing things, pretty much people are printing metal parts now. So we looked at printers and how to make trailers, one-off trailers and these kind of things. So I think it's not the part, I think it's technology that's coming. Ride by wire, on our e-bikes. I ride a lot of e-bikes, and why do I have a chain anymore? Or why do my brakes have hydraulic lines? My Tesla doesn't have any of that, right? So I think it's more the technology than it is the actual parts. So
you think things like printing might actually change the industry as it improves in strength and quality?
Yeah, I do believe that printing parts is probably what we're going to see in the future, especially the higher end stuff. If you want a stem that's 51 instead of 53, you just print it. You need the 3D drawing, but any good 3D guy can take your 53 and basically a couple buttons later, he's got a 51.
Yeah.
Right. And you're not going to tool up for a 51. There's no volume. Right. So everyone's at 48 or 53, but is to give that guy the option. So I think that's where we'll start to initially see it. We'll see a lot of custom stuff. So you can come to me and say, hey, I want to put a 135 hub on my new racing bike instead of a 110. And then you'll be able to print this stuff, right? So I think that's why we looked into it, and it's just not quite there yet. You can't get as intricate as we want, but I see it happening. So, and I think thermoplastics is going to be a big thing in the future, which is carbon fiber, but injected. So that's going to happen. There's a few things like that going on.
I did watch a video of a walkthrough from a factory of yours, and I think it was from USA BMX at one point, maybe 2 years ago. And you did have a 3D printer in there. Do you use it for prototyping?
Yeah, so I'll show you one right now. So this is, you guys are the first to see it, but this is a Cook Brothers crank, right? So this is 3D printed, right? So we work many times just on the shape of that ball. And how does that ball connect to this ball, right? And how do you keep that shape like traditional, but bring in the new spindles, right? Bring in the splines and things that haven't been done before. So all this, and even this little cap. So we got this cap that's going to go in here. That's a long story. There's a cap stuck in there. But these caps, they can be threaded in. So all this was done in a 3D printer, and we probably did 3 or 4 sets before we were happy with it. Same with this little cap that we're doing. That's 3D printed. So we get to physically see that. So what we'll do is, after we are happy with that, then this part will go to overseas. Then they'll make us a prototype, and then that prototype will be tested by me or some of our riders, right? So yeah, so 3D printer works, yeah, but this is we can't ride that.
You said tested by you. Does that mean you still ride a BMX bike?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, all the drivetrain stuff, I don't BMX bike, more mountain bikes. So all the drivetrain test, everything. I mostly ride e-bikes now. I'm tired of, I was doing 400 miles a week when I was a mountain bike racer for 7 years straight, right, or more. And anyway, I'm over doing those long distance climbs and things. I'm a big guy too, so chairlift or e-bike is all I want to ride. But it's been a while since I've been on a BMX track. Last time I was on a BMX track, I was on an e-bike. I was trying to figure out how well an e-bike can jump or not, and it didn't jump. So anyway, but I have issues with my wrists now, and I mean, 40 years of 20 years of professional riding, 40 years of riding, it's jacked up my wrist. Yeah, I ride as much as I can, sure.
Earlier, you were talking about a couple of new brands that might appear under ABC, and you might talk about it a bit later. Do you want to share those brands with us?
I think I've learned my lesson to wait for the trademarks to happen, and that's what we did with Cook Brothers. We put it out there. We knew it was ours. We knew it, but the guy who had it before us claimed that he had it and deserved it. So we had to go to court with it, and we wound up winning because the guy wasn't doing anything with it, and I didn't even know the guy even existed because there was nothing for sale under the brand. There's laws that say you can't just squat on brands either, but a couple of those are going to shock you guys, right? And what I'm going to do with those, because you asked earlier what I want to do, and I'm finding out that in the early days, in my day, we had guys like Bob Osborne and John Carr who created heroes with their magazines. And I was lucky enough to be one of the ones that they would, capitalize on or use or whatever. And I saw Bob Osborne a few weeks ago, and we were talking about this and giving him the credit. He kept saying, "No, I was just doing my job." I said, "Well, I was doing my job, Bob." I go, "You're the one who did it." He goes, "No, I didn't do anything." I go, "Yeah, but you wrote great captions and you wrote." He goes, "Yeah, but I was just doing my job." And now he does the same thing with Cowboys and Indians, literally Cowboys and Indians. He lives in Wyoming. He does exactly the same thing. And he goes, "For me, I do the same thing I do today as I did back then. It was just BMX guys. And now I'm making Cowboys and Indians famous." Right? And he does. He has this whole collection of these guys. He shoots photos and publishes stuff. So I think giving back, I think if I go back, what is the one thing I can do for the sport with these brands that are coming is create heroes. And I think that we've lacked that in the sport for a long time. I don't see how it can be a financial windfall for me by any means. And that's not why we do it, but I'm trying to put it in a business perspective, but I think what the sport needs is heroes. And I think that's what we haven't had in 20 or 30 years or however long it's been. But, Stu Thompson, David Clinton, I mean, I looked up to those guys. David Clinton was my hero. And he was a little bit, before me. But then, Stu Thompson and I were fiercest competitors, and we're really good friends now. Back then, not so much. But if I look back, I go, man, that guy's one of the best bike riders in the world. Right? So how can you not love Stu Thompson? Right? So how do we create those guys again? And I think that's going to be with one of the brands, what I'm going to try to do under a non-status and to really try to take Nick Keeman, who's an awesome kid, an awesome personality. He's great at self-promoting, and you take that kid and you make him world famous and let the kids look up to that, right? And I don't think we've had that in a while. And I don't know that we have a lot of pros that deserve that, but there is some. And I think that that's something I want to try to do. I'm going to need a lot of help to do it because it's something I can't do on a daily basis. But I'm working towards something like that. And I think to give back in the sport is what the brands are about. But like I said, Shane, I don't want to say them now, only because when those trademarks are in my hands, let me show you one. I got my stack of trademarks that I'm working on. So, rider first, that's done. Yep. That's our level up thing, right? It's about the riders. So we got some THE ones. So we got that, right? So that's one of the ones. And then Bottema, right? So anyway, I want those in my hands before I start telling everybody.
Yeah.
What we're doing, right? So. Yeah, Cook Brothers ones are on the way. The Racing one's on its way. So,
just touching on something you mentioned before about creating heroes and magazines. What do you think? What do you think of the fact that there are basically no magazines? I think there's Pull, and that's pretty much it. And trying to market a product. Do you think magazines made it easier and sort of put something physical in people's hands, or do you think the internet's enough where people can go off and search and find what they're looking for?
This is tough because I'm an old guy, and I had that conversation with a lot of young people that work here, and magazines is kind of a joke, and I ask one of my engineers, we talk about something, I ask him a question, he doesn't pick his computer up, he instantly asks Siri. It's innate in him. So a guy like my age, it's not what I do, even though I know it's available to me. I do like Holman magazine. I think Pull's a good magazine. But if I were to put a magazine out there, I don't think I would put a physical one out, because I think the kids today that I'm trying to impress aren't going to do that. But the funny thing about it is, when I ask people, what do you call an online magazine? I've never been told by any journalist there's a real name for it other than online magazine. Is it a blog? Is it a media source? What is it called? And I read a bunch of them. I'm into electric cars, and I read a bunch of that kind of stuff. And I don't know anybody knows what that is, but we won't have a magazine, but we might have something similar. How's that?
Oh yeah, cool. One question, box related. You've got carbon forks in all sorts of different sizes, but there's not a lot of other carbon products as far as box goes, is there? You're not looking at. Oh, you got your bars.
So we
But
got kids bars, and our seats have a carbon post in them, and then we have the new rims, right? We've had rims that weren't really ours in the past. It was one of our customers made them for us. I wasn't really happy with them because they're not unique, so I went out and made a unique carbon ones, which is on the side. But we're just funny. We're talking about the new handlebar this morning, and one of my guys in the back, why don't we make them out of carbon? Because they're not. I go, you cannot make an 8-inch carbon fiber handlebar. It doesn't work. Any pro, if George.A gets on a 8-inch, he's going to snap that sucker right off, right? Or nick, right? So you just some of the applications don't work. Cranks you could, but you don't save any weight. So we do have other ones, just not a lot. And now everything's going to disc brake. So I'm not going to make brake arms or anything like that. We already have box 3 discs and disc rotors and things like that. So now we got to get the frames up to par to stay up with the parts. Hence racing again, right? So yeah, not a lot of carbon. I think if we were to make a carbon fiber bar, you have to go to thermoplastic way to do it. That takes expensive tools and volumes and all that stuff. So right now, the only industries using thermoplastic is the airlines and people that can afford, $50 pieces that big, right? So, but yeah, anyway, so we got some carbon, not a lot.
What pedal options does Box have?
None. Zero. One, because we clip in, and two, because I think Shimano pedals are probably the best pedal ever made. So I don't even know how to even go down that path, right? How do I come in and compete against, or how does Box compete against company like Shimano or Crank Brothers, yeah, a few of the other ones that the guys write time or whatever, but I have some ideas of what I want. If I were to make a Shimano style pedal, I know exactly what I would do. It's just not on our radar at this point. So yeah, I think I'd rather make a shoe first, because there's a lot of work that can be done on the shoes, so.
So you did a shoe with THE, didn't you?
I did. It wasn't a big hit. The manufacturer wasn't good. He made a lot of mistakes along the way, so I finally had to walk away from it. But it was encompassing what I wanted. Something you could walk on, something you could run up a hill with, but at the same time be stiff and ready for on track, right? So, which a lot of other shoes didn't have, right? So, but it was all Shimano based steam, and then Shimano SH51, nothing better pedal than that. So, clean. So.
One thing I haven't heard much of lately is when you first hit the market with Box, and I think Mark Willers was your flagship pro, you had a Freewheel 20mm hub. Does that still exist?
It still exists. Sales are not well on it because the Freewheel was the weak link in that. Although we never had any failures, I think one of the Dutch guys actually blew one up once and got hurt. So it was kind of something that we wanted the 20mm axle. We all swore by it. They all know it, but the Freewheel itself wasn't strong enough. So we got some white industries, got some higher end Freewheels. They still had some minor failures, but you're limited to a 16 at that point. And a lot of guys wanted 15s, and you're just not going to put a 15mm Freewheel around a 20mm axle. Ain't gonna work, right? So I think it was just limitation to the Freewheel part itself, not that the fact that the hub didn't work. So we still have them. We just don't do. It's just not a priority product anymore, right? I think we got to do better than that.
Yeah. Do you think there's still room in the market for a Freewheel, or do you think we've moved on from that now?
Well, it's funny is Yeah, because I sell lots of them. I don't know. I think I sell them to the retro guys is who I'm selling them to.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they're all the bikes come with freewheels. They come with crappy ones. So the first thing they do is they swap the brakes and the freewheel and a couple other parts. But yeah, we sell lots of freewheels still because we do have a high end one. But it's not for the racers, I don't think. I think it's more fixies and other people that are buying them.
So is your freewheel higher engagement than the standard Shimano engagement?
Yes, than Shimano. Yes, it's double than Shimano, but Shimano's low end one.
Yeah.
They're quality, but they're low. They're low end. Ours are $80. Shimano's are 20. So there's a big difference in I think what's going on inside, but it's still not the level that a pro wants, especially against instant, right? That's the big thing. You got to beat instant, and I always thought that was kind of dumb. Why we needed that? Because really, are you going to win a race? But it wasn't until I got up on a starting gate with the stealth hub and go, I get it, because I can set my pedals exactly where I want them without any hesitation, and that for me, that's it right there, right? So
Yeah.
starting gate and setting your pedals exactly where you want them is outweighs any other kind of hub you can get, right? So yeah.
Actually, there is another product I was going to ask you about, the brake lever that integrates with the box grips, the ODI lock-on.
Right.
ODI have started to move towards a 2.1 clamp, which obviously isn't removable or replaceable.
Right.
Do you think you'll come up with a new clamping system that integrates better with that different clamp?
Yeah, I'm actually working on the grip. Oakley. ODI is so busy they didn't have time to do it right now. I talked to them about doing it, and we were actually the drawings are here ready to go, but it does have a single clamp. And I kind of probably walked away from it when I realized I'm going to go against my own brake lever, my own design. So I think if they weren't so busy, I know Dave, I know Colby, they're really good friends of mine. They're not far away. I think when things slow down a little bit for them, maybe we can readdress this. But since you can't take the clamp off, it does kind of restrict what we can do. And they're the ones who allowed me to use that interface. If you look at our brake lever, it has the ODI patent number on it and everything. So there's a relationship there. And we still sell a lot of those grips, the box version of the old style. And we sell a lot of brake levers. So yeah, it's something that it was one of my first patents. I think it's my second patent. We have grip to the lever and grip to the shifter is a patent that we own. I think I need to go back and address that, but I have to have ODI's help. At this point.
All right, Toby, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate you taking the time and chatting with us and answering all of our questions.
Okay, thanks, Shane. Thanks for having me.
Thanks very much, mate.